Welcome to Sometimes There's Side Eye, a podcast about two friends having real and unfiltered conversations about dogs and people. Listen as we talk about our lives with dogs, training, behavior, share some laughs, and a whole lot of banter. I'm Heather,
And I'm Christy.
and we're feeling punchy already.
Mm. We are. What are we going to talk about today, Heather?
Oh, I have anxiety. We're going to talk about ethical breeding.
We are, and ethical breeders.
Yep.
And if you don't turn off your
Don't
podcast
hang
yet,
up. Please don't hang
don't-
up.
if you are like me a couple years ago, you're probably thinking, like, I have no interest in this. Don't disconnect your podcast. If you are rescue only, I still think you're going to get a lot out of this podcast because we're going to go over a lot of things about ethical breeding. And before I met Heather, I didn't realize there were ethical breeders. And so I never had an option to refer friends who only wanted a purebred dog to someone who wasn't going to contribute to the shelter system. And so kind of got caught in this endless loop of you only want a purebred dog and you go to a backyard breeder who is then contributing to the problem of excess dogs in our shelter. And this, I really believe, is a way that we can serve the rescue community
Mm,
by helping understand where ethical breeders are and how to spot ethical breeders so that we get to a point where, and I know this is a very lofty goal, but at some point, my dream would be that we have rescue dogs and ethical breeders. And and if we could cut out those backyard breeders, then we would have far less rescue dogs. We
mm.
would have far less need for shelters. And that is the dream. I'm invested in sheltering, but also like the dream is to put ourselves out of business at some point.
And I think if you haven't already listened to our episode on responsible rescue, which was episode 15, and then our episode with Christy Cole from Desert Harbor Doberman Rescue, which was episode 17, I would say to you, don't forget to go and back and maybe start there and then come back around and start listening to this episode, because I think it will kind of close the loop a little bit if you start back there, because we are proponents of responsible rescue and
Absolutely.
ethical breeding.
And if you're thinking, well, I'm never going to get a purebred dog or a dog from a breeder, guess what? I don't plan to either,
Hmm.
but I still think it's an important topic to address.
Yeah. And maybe you won't, but
Yeah.
maybe you are the person in your friend group who is dog crazy. And so everybody who has questions about dogs comes to you. And maybe you have a friend who comes to you and says they really want a Havanese puppy. And you have listened to this podcast and you are now able to direct them away from a puppy mill, away from Petland, away from a irresponsible source and towards an ethical breeder. That makes you an even better educator when it comes to the welfare of dogs.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Heather, what is an ethical breeder?
In my mind, ethical breeders are doing some really key things that are helping just dogs in general. When you start to Google around and you look for a definition of ethical breeders, you might come across something like this: ethical breeders provide their dogs with a high quality of care, which includes providing all dogs with quality food, clear water, proper shelter, exercise, socialization, and professional veterinary care, keeping dogs clean and well groomed, raising dogs intended to be pets in a home environment. For me, ethical breeders are way more than that. And what they
Yeah.
provide are so much more. So if you start Googling around for a definition of ethical breeding, I just want you to sit and listen because it gets much, much bigger than that. Some of
Absolutely.
the kind of pillars of ethical breeding, number one on the list is that they take back their dogs. So
Mhm.
if someone is ethically breeding, and I don't care what they're breeding, I don't care if it's a Doberman to a poodle to a doodle, I don't care. They are willing at any point in the dog's life, at any age, any circumstance, to take that dog back, and they are contracted to do so. That for
Mhm.
me is something that is a non-negotiable, no matter, because everyone has opinions and little
Sure.
nuances to their definition of ethical, right? We're all
Yeah.
individuals. Some of my Rottweiler people will listen to this and be like, I don't agree with that, whatever. We all have our little nuances. But at the end of the day, that for me is 100% a non-negotiable, a staple of ethical breeding. It's like Christy Cole said, if only people are breeding ethically, they're taking their dogs back, so then we don't have a need for rescue.
Yeah.
Boom.
That's why it's so important to know what ethical breeders are and
Yes.
direct people that way instead of just throwing up your hands and saying, you should just get a rescue dog when they're not going to anyway. Throwing up our hands often directs people right to backyard breeders. But
Yes.
if we can say, hey, at least go to a breeder who's going to take their dogs back
Yeah.
if it's a bad fit or if something happens to
Yeah.
you, or there are so many dogs in rescue because their owner passed away,
Yes.
like, which is horribly sad. No fault of the owner,
Or
obviously,
the dog.
or the dog. Yeah. But if we had breeders who said, "You know what? That's my dog. I will take on that responsibility, even though the dog is 10 years old, 12 years
Mhm.
old, and not a puppy. I'll bring that dog back into the fold."
Yeah. So that kind of non-negotiable also leads me to a second one, which is the puppies are sold on contract. This was the thing that started me and Christy's, like, deep
Yeah.
dive into our
Blew
friendship
my mind.
and just blew Christy's mind. We've talked about it before that was mentioning at a get together that I was buying Tiago and that I was waiting for, I think I had the contract, but I hadn't signed it yet. And I was talking with the breeder over her contract, which Tiago's contract was like 4 or 5 pages long. Christy just, wait, what? You're signing a contract? Like there's a contract? And I was like, oh yeah. I really feel that contracts are another non-negotiable. I think it protects the breeder and the buyer
Mhm.
because it gives very clear expectations for people going forward when it comes to the dog, at least for the contracts that I have signed for dogs or received for dogs, it tells me about the puppy. So, what vaccinations have they had? What the expectations are for spay and neuter? What my expectations are for any milestones I have to hit? Anything like that. It also notes that I have to return the dog to the breeder if I couldn't keep them. And then it might go into other details. Every contract is different. Every breeder has their own things that are really important to them, but it also protects you because if you're ever like, "Oh, I'm not sure what did I need to do or what were the expectations?" You just go back to this document and you know exactly where you stand. For me, I think that a contract is also a non-negotiable when we're talking about expectations for ethical breeding.
I would like to say, I think there's probably some people out there that are like, no, if something happens to me, I have a backup plan. The contract doesn't mean that you can't
Mhm.
work with your breeder and have a
Mhm.
backup plan. Do I think if something happens to Heather and Jer, Tiago is going back to his breeder?
He's
No.
not.
I right. Like he has a wait list of people who are in line. But Heather would need to communicate that to the
Yeah.
breeder so that they had clear expectations of, "Hey, I already have a backup.
Mhm.
Here's my
So
backup plan." But what if I actually took in a foster who had a backup plan. The dogs got along great socially, but living together was non-optional, was not
mm,
an option. And the other 2 dogs attacked the foster that I ended up
mhm.
taking in. And so they did have to give this dog up to rescue even though there was a backup plan in
Yeah.
place. If that backup plan doesn't work, then your backup plan knows who to
Mhm.
contact, those types of
Yeah,
things.
I mean, Tiago's breeder is in New York, so obviously logistically, like, to get him, that's a whole thing, and I'm married, so if I passed away, my
Yeah.
husband would automatically be the person that his breeder would be in touch with. And then she also, because I'm friends with my breeder on social media, and Tiago is almost 7, but we have a continued relationship. I still talk to her on the phone. She knows the people in my life who are his aunties. And so it would be a very easy conversation to say, "Hey, I am so and so, and I would like to negotiate for Tiago to remain with me." So I agree with you. But I think that's the same as what might happen in rescue, because if God forbid Jer and I were not around, Tater, his adoption contract says that he gets returned to his rescue, which is in Oklahoma.
Tater's not going back to Oklahoma.
Right. But that's my
Tater's coming to
point.
Christy's house.
Right. So that's my point. And like his foster parents are on my social. They know
Yeah,
his people. And I
yeah.
think just like Tiago, that would be a conversation of, hey, nobody's given Tater up. It's not happening. And it makes more sense for Tater to stay in an environment with people he knows and he's been around. So it's the same kind of concept. And both of those things keep the dogs from going back into our community and having to go through the rescue system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent.
So those are two really big non-negotiables for me. I also think that education on not just the type of dog that you're getting, but on training, socialization, just an overall educational.
A heart of an educator, you know?
Yes, yes. I really think that part of an ethical breeder's job is to make sure that their buyers are well educated on the type of dog they're getting, what to expect, and what training should look like, and all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to be going into a new breed, and so I really looked for a breeder who I felt like I could have a interactive relationship with, because I want to be able to go to them and ask questions if I'm not sure. Instead of going to a random Facebook group, I want to be able to ask the person who actually produced my dog and has had this breed for more than a decade. And so I think that educational back and forth and relationship is really,
Mhm.
really important, and something that needs to be there when it comes to ethical breeding. And some breeders start out, they're new, but then they should also have a mentor or someone they're working with, so
Sure.
that no matter what, there's a resource there or resources for them to go to.
Yeah. I don't think I realized that there was this mentor new breeder situation that happens. So, do you want to maybe just like briefly
Mhm.
kind of explain what that relationship looks like or could look like? I know every
Yeah,
every relationship's different. So,
yeah. I think it was more common before the internet. But I do see in a lot of people who are continuing to ethically breed purebred dogs, more than anything, they will have a person who is usually in the same breed as they're working in, but sometimes not if they don't have access to that, who is actually mentoring them on the breed and on breeding in general, because holy crap, there's so much there. And then a lot of times they will actually be a mentor with them long term, even after they have their first litter. So it's a resource for the newer breeder as they learn. And then it's also a resource potentially for buyers. So I have a lot of friends who have purchased puppies, and they don't just, they become part of the network. They become part of this larger family. And that larger family is access to so many people who are breed enthusiasts. And it becomes this really supportive network that people are a part of now as they become part of this sort of huge group
Mhm.
of people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
I think we touched on that a little bit with Christy Cole about how I come from that different background of like coming from a purebred dog, that sense of community that comes with that,
Mm.
that you didn't really, I don't think you really understood that before
Yeah.
meeting me.
Yeah, there is a sense of community in with pit bulls
I
and with
agree.
rescue dogs, but
It's different.
it's not the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, I don't think I realized how lucky I was to
Mhm.
have that community for so long. until I really became a pit bull advocate and then started working within the shelter, the rescue community. I really didn't understand how much of an asset it was to have those people behind me, helping me and supporting me as a family as I got more Rottweilers and went
Yeah.
throughout my journey with them.
Yeah. It's a huge thing. I feel like I'm thankful for the rescue community I
Yeah.
have, but that is because I invested in specific groups. I
Yes.
invested time and energy in specific groups in the rescue community to
Mhm.
build those relationships. But I honestly, I can't imagine going through Lucy's house stuff without having a community to bounce things off of,
Mhm.
to even behaviorally, like when she was
Mhm.
younger, to is this normal? Is this
Mhm.
like what is happening in my life right now?
Mhm.
And I think that I don't think that's widespread across rescue
Mhm.
or pit bulls. It just happened to be the community I fell into
Yeah.
or I worked at falling into.
At falling, yeah. And I also think that when you're talking about purebred dogs or more controlled breeding
Yes.
specimens and everything, that it's easier to see patterns or should be easier to see patterns.
Yes.
So if I have a question about a Rottweiler, I have this huge community of people behind me. I mean, so I have hundreds of decades of experience in Rottweilers only behind me to go to and say, I have this issue with my Rottweiler. Have any of you dealt with this? And that is a powerful machine. And that
Mhm.
is something that you can't really understand until you've been a part of it, how special it is, you know?
Mhm.
Actually,
Yeah.
my Rottweiler community has helped my pit bull people too. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
they have.
yeah.
Absolutely. I will say with a purebred dog, every dog I hear you. I already hear you. Every dog is an
Same.
individual. I hear you.
Yes.
But there should be predictable
Mhm.
behaviors and there should be some prediction in a purebred
There
dog.
is.
And so that goes into where that people who are passionate about that breed and understand that breed are able to help.
Yeah, I mean, I've had 3 Rottweilers, they've all come from different avenues. My first one was from a
Mm,
backyard breeder, my second one was from rescue, and Tiago is from an ethical breeder. They have all had different personalities, they have all been individuals, but there are things about the breed that ring true that kept me coming back, and a Rottweiler is a Rottweiler is a Rottweiler. There is just something about them that is particular that speaks to my heart. Although, like I said, they all had their own like little quirky characteristics. It's funny, my husband said to me just a couple weeks ago, he said, my husband really likes dogs when they're older. He's like Christy. He likes them when they're like all settled in, they're adults and
yeah.
they're easy.
Yeah.
So our boys are really
What's not
easy,
to
right?
like?
I know. But he said to me, Tiago's, everybody knows Tiago's my dog. But he said to me, you know what? He's like, even with Tiago's elbow and like how unfortunate that is, I wouldn't change a thing because Tiago is exactly what we expected to get when it
Mm,
comes to a Rottweiler. He
mm,
really, truly is. And I agree 100%. He's exactly
yeah,
what I expected to get.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
powerful. That's
That's interesting, yeah. From somebody
that's
who's not in it, the
nope.
way you are. Yeah,
Yep. And Rottweilers aren't his breed.
yeah,
Yeah. So it was interesting. I got a little teary because it was like, oh,
yeah.
like it took 6 years, but you finally get it.
You got it, you got it.
He always gets there. It just takes a little time. But that goes back to like the preservation part of it. So
Mhm,
for anyone who's not sure, you might also hear a term like preservation breeders, or you'll hear the term well bred. Preservation, it's about people who are deeply passionate about preserving purebred dogs. So those are dogs like Rottweilers, pugs, Labrador retrievers, golden retrievers, preserving those breeds true to the written standard that is put out there by the American Kennel Club, we'll just use because we're in the US, and really breeding dogs who are consistent and predictable to that standard.
So, would you say, let's just
Oh,
let's
here
just
we
jump
go.
into the controversy.
Yeah,
Would
go.
you would you say that people can be ethical breeders if they are not preservation breeders? Maybe they're breeding mixed breeds for different reasons. So we go back
It's
to your first
yes,
two
yes.
points.
Okay. So I have absolutely evolved on this subject. I probably 5 years ago, maybe less, would have staunchly stood in the circle of if you're not breeding a purebred dog that is AKC registerable and showable, you're not ethical. Having said that, I am now in the camp of I would like to see people passing the bar of being ethical and producing nice dogs, temperamentally sound dogs, behaviorally sound dogs, as healthy as possible dogs for people, and selling them on contract, taking their dogs back no matter what happens at any age, and a few other various things. And if they're hitting those milestones for me, I am no longer going to I was a dick. Like I'm not going to stand there and judge you. I'm not. And I have a lot of reasons for that, but that's where I am today. And it's really interesting because the more that I talk to my friends who are preservation breeders, these are people who are deep in it, right?
Right.
They are really moving towards my standpoint as well. I think that I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Are we going to get into
Mm,
this? Because we can.
maybe.
I mean, I think there's not enough nice dogs out there. And
Yeah.
I think that I think that if somebody really gets into it and digs deep, that they can actually find a purebred that meets all of their criteria because there's a lot of breeds out there that are unknown, that
Mm.
are rarer. But the flip side of that is if they're rarer or they're unknown, there's barely any available, and majority of preservation breeders aren't going to sell them to a pet home. Sorry, ethical breeders,
Absolutely.
but you're putting up barriers. And I love you all and I respect you all and I know why you're doing it. But
Honestly,
you're shooting
if I
yourself
was
in the
in
foot.
but also, if I was in that situation, I've been in situations where I have several options for
Yes.
a foster dog to go
Yeah.
into a home. Of course, I'm gonna choose the more experienced, the
Mhm.
owner I feel is the best
Mhm.
fit,
Yeah.
you know, of
Yeah.
course, because I just want the absolute best for
Yeah.
this dog. So I get it.
I
And I
get
will
it.
say, yeah, I'll say like, so my best friend Michelle, if you guys
Yeah.
have all been listening,
Doodle
she has a
episode.
doodle.
Yep.
Yeah, she comes up a lot, and her dog Macy. I think a Portuguese water dog would have been a good fit for her.
Agree.
Probably. I went with her and we met an
Mhm.
ethical breeder here in Arizona. Answered a lot of questions for
Mhm.
us. Guess what? They didn't choose her as a
No.
first-time dog owner. I think she asked the right questions. I think she showed the right interest. Heather and I
Mhm.
both helped her with her application, you know,
Absolutely.
but at the end of the day, that's not who they chose.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it would have taken for her to be
Yeah.
chosen by a Portuguese water dog
Mhm.
breeder.
And I
Eh,
think that that's a real problem.
Yeah,
And I see it from both sides. I
yeah.
really do. And so for me, part of what has come out of that is the change in people doing mixed breeds. And I know if you do any research on how the doodle craze started, like whatever, we're not going to get into it, but it's here. And
It's just
like we said, America has spoken. They love doodles. They love the mix. So if that is today's companion dog that the American family has chosen, okay, what we now want is the only people who are breeding those companion dogs are people who are doing so ethically. Because my fear now, after COVID and everything that's happening, is our shelters now are going to switch from being filled with pit bulls to being filled with doodles because people were not doing so ethically. And if we follow that train of thought, those dogs are going to flow into the shelter system. On the flip side, if they had been bred ethically, then one, they most likely wouldn't have been behavioral nightmares. And the people would have been educated on how to groom them and how much it costs and what it takes to take care of one. And they would have done proper socialization protocols. And they also would have had health testing behind them, right? All this stuff that goes into ethical breeding. And then the damn dog wouldn't end up in the shelter because either it was stable and wonderful and beautiful and exactly what the family expected, or it would go back to the breeder.
I will say, originally, Michelle reached out to a different breeder in Tucson,
Mm-hmm.
and that breeder did not have the size doodle that Michelle wanted.
The
However,
size.
the
Yeah.
correct, she only did like minis, I think.
Gotcha.
But that breeder was so passionate
Mhm.
about her breed. She knew Michelle was never going to be a customer of hers. She got her all sorts of information about
I love that.
um, doodle breed and health testing that she would encourage for doodles, grooming, behavior, training, all that stuff. And then she passed her over to a different, and she said, here's some breeders
Mhm.
in your area that do breed this size doodle
Mhm.
and that I would feel comfortable recommending you to,
Mhm.
which I thought that's amazing.
It's
That
the way it
woman was
should
just
be.
so passionate about what she's doing and the breed she's breeding, even though it's not a purebred, even though it's a doodle, but she just loves the breed so much and is so passionate. She wants to educate
Mhm.
anyone potentially looking at the breed.
And here's the thing, that breeder is pushing people away from backyard breeders. I applaud
Right.
that breeder because her label should not just be ethical breeder or breeder, it should be breeder and educator because
Yeah.
that's so amazing. And I think that that's a key component to this to the whole thing. I used to say that I would never in a million years consider ever breeding a dog. Like I don't want to deal with it. I don't want the responsibility. It's just never ever something that I ever thought I would consider. And I found myself today actually thinking about it because I am an educator and there are so many ways to help dogs by being an ethical breeder. And I know for some of you that's such an oxymoron, like it just doesn't
Sure.
compute in your head. But if you listen to this entire series of podcasts that we're doing and you sit down and put it all together, responsible rescue and ethical breeding equals helping dogs,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
which is helping our community too.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And I think for me, maybe what changed my mind is as I like kind of thought more about mixed breeds and like originally because
Mhm.
Heather was educating me, I just was
I was
like,
like,
run.
purebred baby.
Yeah. And Heather would say always say like you're only taking the best of each
Mhm.
breed and breeding it.
Mhm.
And that's what ethical breeding is.
Mhm.
And and then that's changed because
Mhm.
then as I went on this journey, learning from Heather, but learning from others as well, I started thinking about mixed breeds too. And there are people in the sports world who specifically mix breeds
Mhm.
for more speed, for more agility, for
Mhm.
more of whatever their sport is.
Mhm.
And they come into this weird place of if that dog doesn't pound out as a sports dog, you still have to
Mhm.
have homes
Pet
for it.
homes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
pet homes that are willing to take this high drive dog,
Mhm.
but as long as they are doing that and making sure that they're standing behind their dogs,
I don't
okay,
care. Yeah.
I don't care.
I believe that everyone has a right to a healthy, stable, functional, behaviorally
Yeah,
sound dog. I don't care where
absolutely.
you get it from. I believe everyone has the right to that and should have it, to be honest, because having a dog like Tiago is a joy. It is a fucking joy. And
And you guys, dogs should be fun to own.
yes,
Dogs should be fun.
yeah, it shouldn't be a job to like, well,
I
puppies are
mean,
hard, but
these are
but
hard.
like it shouldn't be a
It should bring you joy.
managerial task to own a dog in your home.
Yeah. You shouldn't sign up for a dog thinking that it's just another task to be
Yeah.
done.
Even Christy Cole said, we want to match you with the dog that you can handle, not just, oh, you have to take a rescue. And that's not
Yeah,
to talk badly about rescue. Ethical breeders should be
no,
matching you with the right dog as well.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you this. This will be, sorry, I didn't warn
Why?
you
I
I was
feel
gonna
like
ask you this.
interrogating. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, well, because you're like my interviewee because
yeah,
I don't have as much information and you're like in the trenches.
rock and roll.
I'm in the trenches by association only.
There you go.
Do you feel like health testing is necessary to be ethical?
100%.
Okay.
I think
Do you
that, go ahead.
do you think there's ethical breeders out there who are not health testing?
Okay. Let me start by saying this.
Lord.
Everyone knows that Tiago has elbow dysplasia. Tiago came from an ethical breeder. There is lots of health testing behind him. There is no perfect dog.
Mhm.
There is no perfect breeding. When I looked at Tiago's breeding, I knew that there was a possibility for elbow dysplasia behind him. I was aware.
Mhm.
It was a risk that I was willing to take because I knew everything else that I wanted was there. And even with the hell and the heartbreak and everything else I've been through with his elbow, he is the exact fucking dog that I hoped for. And having said that, I don't wish that on anyone or any dog because it's miserable. But there just isn't a perfect anything ever. Having said all of that, if we have the ability to have more education and more information when we are making breeding choices, I feel personally that there is no way I could move forward and breed dogs when I haven't taken a peek inside. It doesn't guarantee anything. It is simply information. And if there is information available, I think that you need to be taking advantage of that. How you utilize that and what you do with it is a very, very convoluted, complex, individual decision. And there are some people that would look at Tiago's litter and consider the decision to breed that litter unethical. I think that they are looking through a very, very narrow pinhole view to make a decision. I think for someone to judge someone's decision is really difficult unless they haven't even looked at all the information that's available. It's a
Mhm.
really touchy subject because
It is.
for me, in Rottweilers, we have so much health testing. It's been going on for generations and generations and generations. I can look back 5 generations minimum at Tiago's health testing behind him, and there's, tons of generations in front of him. I have so much, but Rottweilers are a very heavy breed. They're a working breed. So there's a lot of reason why Rottweiler breeders started health testing as soon as it was possible. They were seeing issues that needed to be figured out. They were seeing the need for the dogs to be able to be functional, and they needed more information of how to continue that. So for large breeds, I find it to be more accessible. Smaller breeds, it's absolutely harder to find. And I think that
Interesting.
yeah, I think that that's one because they're smaller. So they don't have as much stress on their bodies and they're not necessarily doing working jobs. You're not taking a Lhasa Apso normally and going and working hardcore on a farm or herding or you know what I mean? It's just not and then they're like finer boned. So the
Mm,
issues that they can have are just less detrimental. But there are some breeds that I don't think are health testing enough. And I think you have old school breeders who have been around for 40 years and they know their lines like the back of their hands. They can spit out every dog behind every dog they've bred on both sides, going back 10 generations, and tell you exactly every detail about that dog. Because before health testing, that's what you had. You shared information with each other. They shared information and would be like, "Hey, I had this dog that I bred and it died at 5 from epilepsy." Well,
mm,
that's something they would share with other breeders so that there could be information like, "Hey, that might have been from this combination. We don't want that," and they bred out that way. Now we have more information. We can test for those type of things.
mm.
So, I think that you have those old school breeders who really staunchly in the camp of I will not health test because of a lot of different factors. They just don't feel like they need to. For me, I just believe if you have access to information that you should use it.
So I guess what we're saying in that is
I really went
we would,
roundabout there.
yeah, I think we both would agree that health testing is in the best interest
Interest
of the purchaser and the breeder, in our opinion.
and the dog.
But there are some breeds that health testing is not common, and so it's, well, I'm not getting a purebred dog. While Heather probably wouldn't have a puppy from a non-health tested pairing, it doesn't mean that those breeders should automatically be dismissed.
Yeah,
Um,
I
like as unethical. Like we shouldn't say you're
I don't
unethical
think you can
because
paint it with a broad brush.
yeah, yeah. But if you have access to information, then take advantage of that. Is
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
is our personal opinion and suggestion.
I think it's like if you meet someone and they are selling on contract, they're taking their dogs back, they're really educated, they're educating you, they're offering resources, they're socializing, they're current on all so many different things, but you're buying a Lhasa Apso and they're in the breed for 40 years and you've met dogs from them. I'm not going to tell you to run. I'm going to tell you to
Yeah.
trust your gut. And I'm gonna tell you that
Also gonna tell you to research
I'm
some.
gonna tell you to research. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I don't know what the congenital issues in a Lhasa Apso are, and I'm using that breed just
Exactly.
because I don't know shit about it.
Yeah.
So
We're not picking on you, Lhasa Apso owners.
no,
We just don't know
like,
anything
well,
about
I
your
don't know.
breed.
It's an example because I don't know shit about them. There
Yeah.
might be something in that breed that you can do a blood test for that's like killing the breed, and all you have to do is a simple blood test. If you've
Yeah.
researched that and you know that, and you meet the person and they're not doing that test, fucking run. But
Yeah.
that's on you also as a buyer to be educated, just like we want you to be educated on the rescue side. It's the same thing.
Absolutely. I would say that's part of the reason why this is a moving target. Sometimes we get lost in the weeds
Yes.
in this. And when we know certain breeds, we apply those ethics in that breed with a broad
Ac
stroke to all
Mhm,
breeds.
mhm.
And that's not really necessarily
I'm not
mm,
sure that's
like,
fair,
it's not fair because each breed has its own issues.
for sure,
Also, I understand that King Charles Cavalier Spaniels, when my friend lost hers to a heart condition, I was like, "Are you kidding me? I thought you went to an ethical breeder." And then I talked to a vet and she's like, "She probably did go to an ethical breeder,
but it's a
but
problem in the
that is
breed.
running rampant in the
Mhm,
breed and it is so different. It doesn't
mhm,
necessarily mean that the breeder's unethical. It's just so rampant in the
mhm,
breed. It is tough to get a
mhm.
dog that's not going to have that heart issue, just like boxers and cancer.
Yeah, and it
Like,
doesn't mean that ethical breeders aren't aware and aren't working their asses off to eradicate it,
yeah.
but there are some things that there aren't tests for yet. That's
Mhm.
also a problem. Science has to catch up with what's happening, and
Yeah.
there was an issue within the Rottweiler breed. There was this really horrible thing that they didn't have a test for a long time because the science hadn't caught up. And now we have a test for it. It's called JLPP, and it's just a little cheek swab. Yeah, great. We can test for it now. And all ethical breeders are testing for it for all breeding specimens, right?
Mhm.
And prior to having that cheek swab, there wasn't a way other than that tribal knowledge of that freaking dog threw a dog that died from that thing that wasn't even named yet.
Uh,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was like that passing of information between breed enthusiasts to be like, hey, you might want to watch out because I bred a litter to that dog and we had a dog that died from that horrible thing we're all talking about, but doesn't have a name yet.
Mm.
There's that part of it too, where things come
Yeah.
up and we just the science hasn't caught up with us yet. But
And there's
sorry,
um
I just got excited. But without preservation breeders who know their lines and who are
right.
really committed to the breed, we don't have a way to figure it out.
Yeah. And I think that kind of brings me into like another thought of we should also give grace, I guess, to breeders who are trying different things to
Mm,
better the breed. So sometimes those different things don't look like AKC standards
mhm,
necessarily, show dog standards. Sometimes they do, but sometimes to try to get something out of a breed or to try to better the breed as a whole, breeders try different things and sometimes it doesn't work out either. Sometimes in our mind we think, oh, if we breed this and this, that will produce, X and plus Y equals W for
yeah,
whatever reason. But it actually X plus Y equals WZK.
yeah,
Like, and
yeah,
we don't even know what all that brings with it. And so
yeah,
it didn't work the way. But we have to, man, it's tough because these are living sentient beings. And that's where it gets really tough.
and that's
But
why we
also
need
sometimes,
people doing it ethically.
yeah, exactly. And that's why we need to give some grace to people who are saying, I see this problem and I'm going to try this as a solution, who are not just rampantly idiots off the street who don't know anything about breeding, you know. Like Bob down the street said he's gonna, if your name's
Okay,
Bob, sorry.
like your brother. That was real
Yeah,
nice.
sorry, Bob.
No, I get what you're saying though. Oh, do we want to use my puppy as an example? Because
Sure, yeah, if you're willing to.
so the breeder that I've decided to go to is absolutely not like her puppies and dogs would get laughed out of an AKC show ring. She it just would not happen. And she is not necessarily someone that people who are really passionate about breeding French bulldogs to the exact standard as per set by AKC would really consider ethical. Having said that, I really love that breed, but am clearly nervous about the health aspect of that breed. And I tried like hell to find another breed that fit into what I was looking for that was didn't have maybe the worries and was unsuccessful. And so here I sit and I find myself caring a lot more about someone who is breeding for health and function, maintaining the personality of a French bulldog and all the things I love about it,
Mhm,
but cannot walk into an AKC show ring and get a championship.
mhm,
And I'm sitting here, I'm good with that. And that's coming from having a Rottweiler
mhm,
who I showed to a championship and who I'm really proud to have showed, had him get a championship and proud of the way he looks and how gorgeous he is to where I sit now and the experiences that I've had in the past 20 years as an adult of owning dogs has put me here. And those
mhm,
experiences are deeply trenched in a whole lot of really, really terrible health problems, really life altering stuff.
Yeah.
And damn, I didn't think I'd get
Mhm.
emotional. And a lot of that stuff is comes from a place of structure and functionality. And so I'm in a kind of tough spot. I really love these certain types of dogs and their personalities, and they're a really
Right.
great fit for who I am. And so I'm stacking the deck in my favor on the side of health and behavior and temperament.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I'm saying if that gets me a dog that can't be shown, I don't give a fuck.
Right. And it's okay. Like
It is
that's your
okay.
decision.
I'm good with it.
And what's interesting is 6, 7 years ago, had I had that conversation with you,
It would have been
it
very
would have
different.
been very different. You would
Yep.
have felt like that's very unethical to
Yep.
have a dog that can't be shown, that isn't to breed
Yep.
standards.
When in
Um,
reality, I feel like I love my people, but I know of people that I just know of in passing that
Mhm,
can show their dog to the nth degree that have
mhm,
less ethics than this
yes.
person that I'm choosing to
Right.
go to, right? So there's nuance and there's color to all of it and there's gray to
Mhm.
all of it, but there's still those cornerstones, those pillars. She's going to get laughed at by a lot of people, and I'm going to answer for the rest of this dog's life. Is that a French bulldog? But
I love that apparently people who have questions sound
I
nasally.
know. Oh, you like that. But
Yeah.
she's doing every health testing known to man. She's
Yeah.
got awesome temperament and she's got it behind her dog. She's on like her fourth, fifth generation. She's deeply invested in health because she's been through some of the things I've been through. And she's selling on contract. She's taking her dogs back. She's educating. She is busting her ass to make sure that the dogs that she's producing are dogs she wants to own. And
Yeah.
I respect that. And I call that
Yeah.
ethical.
Yeah. Absolutely. And having a French bulldog who can breathe
Yeah. I'm
is
looking forward
important.
to it.
Yeah. In fact, I was on a meeting Friday at work, and the director was running the meeting, and she said, "I'm so sorry. Can you hear that?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, what's happening?" And she goes, "I'm so sorry. That's my dog. He's locked in the room with me and he's just having a bad breathing day." And
Oh,
she has a pug who cannot breathe.
that's really
And she
sad.
just was very, like, flippant about it because she's lived her whole life, like,
She
the dog's
expects
whole
it.
life with it not be and she goes, "Oh, he's just having a bad breathing day. It's no big
I
deal."
hate that for the
I thought,
dog.
how awful that this is an expectation that a breed of dog just can't breathe.
I
Like,
hate
that's
that.
very basic. Like, that's a basic need for
Mhm.
dogs to be able to breathe. Like,
It's also not
come on.
necessary. I
Yeah.
honestly really do hate that for the dogs. I know that it's possible to breed these brachycephalic dogs who are actually functional and can live. I have a friend who her and her husband breed pugs. They are extremely invested in the preservation of the breed. I'll probably own a dog from them at some point. Those dogs live in Montana and they hike miles. They herd some of them
Oh
and
my god.
yep, they are fully functional, well, health tested, fantastic dogs. Like, I just hate that it's accepted. It's like English
Yeah.
bulldogs, French bulldogs. There's a lot of breeds that are breaky that people just accept, oh, it's just the way it has to be. No, it's not.
And just so you know, for the audience, breaky just means that
Oh
pushed
yeah,
up nose,
I'm
like
just
that
lazy.
squishy pug,
Yeah,
Frenchy,
yep.
yeah,
I mean, it's
nose,
more
yeah.
involved in that than that, but
Yes,
yes.
but like the layman's terms, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not gonna get into, like, the ethics of even having those breeds at all because it's just a freaking
Right,
rabbit hole, but I do believe that
right,
there's ways to, like, have those dogs that are functional.
yeah,
Tater is
yeah,
a Tater is actually a really functional breathing-wise English bulldog.
yeah.
He has limitations, but, like, we're not trying to heat stroke any dog.
My vet saw a picture of him
Uh-huh.
and, like, messaged me separately and said, "Wow, that dog has a great nose."
Oh!
And she said, like, "I really like his face. It looks like he's a dog who can breathe."
Yeah,
And I said, "Actually, he does barn hunt and he does this and that." And she goes, "That's so encouraging."
yeah.
She's like,
Yeah.
"I could tell from the picture that he was an active dog
Yep.
that seemed to be able to breathe."
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I think that if we're really just kind of painting with a broad brush, then that would look like the dogs are functional, the dogs are
Yeah,
healthy. And that should be a cornerstone of any ethical breeder. Yeah.
yeah. And kind of what you were saying before we started recording.
Oh,
Do you wanna
yeah.
say that again? Because,
Yeah.
like,
I want to
that was
repeat
so
it.
good.
Okay. So basically, I was saying to Christy, something that's really disheartening for me is when people just say, "I'm not gonna research an English bulldog because they're all unhealthy, so I can just buy one from anywhere." And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Ah." Or, "I want a French bulldog, they're all unhealthy, so I'll just go anywhere." No, please don't do that. Please don't,
Right.
because you are not just setting yourself up for a whole lot of heartbreak that might not have to happen. You're also
Mhm.
setting up the dog for a whole lot of heartbreak and pain and suffering. There are absolutely people who are trying their best. It's not perfect. There's no perfection here, but there are people who are busting their asses to breed healthy, functional dogs, no matter the breed. So please, if you have your heart set on one of those breeds in the urban legend, and I've said it myself, all English bulldogs are unhealthy. It's not reality. You can look and you can find some people who are really trying to make strides in the breed that you love and be able to work towards breaking that stigma.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do
I
better by dogs.
Yeah, I actually was talking to my friend who breeds pugs, and they had sold one of their dogs to someone, and he was all excited that it was a female. And he took her to the vet to get spayed and to do his intro to the vet and everything. And the vet told him just expect that when they do the spay, they're going to have to do breathing surgery, and really freaked the guy out. And he left the vet. He's all upset. He calls my friend who's the breeder and he's like, "I'm going to have to get breathing surgery." And the vet said that if I don't do it, there's going to be all these breathing problems and everything, right? And my breeder friend was like, "Listen, if they put her under and they find an issue, I want them to call me. Like, I want to know about this because that's a problem and I need to know. And
Mhm.
I want to talk to the vet about it." And so the dog goes in, the dog gets spayed. The vet calls the owner, apologizes for scaring him and for
Mm.
assuming that the dog was going to need breathing surgery because it was the best airway that he had ever seen on a pug, and he had no idea that there were actually people out there ethically breeding pugs who can breathe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Don't assume that just
good.
because you want a pug, you can't find a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's gonna take some research,
It is.
but you should be able to find purebred dogs who are healthy.
The other part of it, if we're circling back to the mixed breeders
Yeah.
too, is the problem that I have is we were talking about, I'm sure I can find a purebred dog on a list that would fit your home and whatever. It's tough because the average family doesn't know, as we say, the secret handshake and the password to know how to talk to a
No,
breeder and to know
absolutely.
how to have a conversation that actually makes the breeder feel confident in selling them a dog. And
Mhm.
that's really difficult too. I think that's a piece of why I talk ad nauseum about ethical breeders and all this stuff, because I really do want to educate the buyers on how to approach this, but then
Mhm.
also talk to my breeder friends about how important it is that we all meet in the middle,
Mhm.
because the average person doesn't know how to talk to a breeder. They're
Right.
not educated. They don't
No.
understand all this stuff, but they're trying like hell to do the right thing. So
Right.
that's part of it too. And I think that that is also why we've seen this huge boom in the doodles and the mixed breeds because there's this huge section of our population who wants a bred dog, who wants to start with a puppy, who thinks that they're doing the right thing, and who is finding their way to this market, right? And so then the market's responding and saying, "Ooh, there's all these people who like want this, and we're gonna make it happen," right? And so when we have the average person who goes and wants a pet dog and they go to an ethical breeder and they get turned away, and sometimes they're rudely turned away,
Mhm.
it pushes them towards this other market. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's a need for that market, but we want to make sure that those people aren't going to backyard breeders. They're going to somebody who's ethically breeding. I think that when people are looking for a nice family dog and they've decided they want a specific breed or a specific mix, and they go to someone who is ethical and they get turned away, we're pushing them straight to a backyard breeder. And I think that that's a major problem.
Mhm. Also, the supply of ethically bred dogs is very low.
Yes.
And I don't think it is fair to tell your average American family who wants a dog to race with their kids because they had this great experience to wait 5 years, six
Yeah.
years. I mean,
It's not reasonable.
that's a whole different kid.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
you've
yeah.
gone a whole lifetime, you know?
When I have people come to me and they want help finding a well-bred dog, or I'll get random messages, "Hey, my friend's looking at this breeder. Do you think they're ethical?" And I like take a little 5-minute Google. I think it's really difficult because the wait for a purebred dog, ethically bred, purebred dog,
Mhm,
is gonna be on average 1 to 2 years.
mhm.
And I think that that's really tough. I think that the majority of dog owners are not me, and
Right.
they really aren't. I'll wait 3 years if I have to for the right dog, but I have very specific needs and wants.
Absolutely. And okay, you know, you're somebody who knows that you should
I've set
plan
myself up.
in advance. Right.
Absolutely.
What if
That's not the
something
average dog owner.
Right. What if something happened to Tiago and Tater
I stressed
right
it,
now
did
and
I not?
you have no
I've
dogs?
stressed it.
Yeah,
I have
and
stressed
now
it.
you have 2 years before you get a
Yeah.
dog. Ah,
And here's the
okay.
thing, I could probably find a dog because I'm connected.
You are, yes.
I
You
am.
could
And
probably
and
find a
and
dog, yeah.
but that's so unfair, right? And
Is
I
it?
understand why
You've
it's
put in the
unfair.
work.
Well,
You're
that's
you're
true.
okay. It's not
But
really unfair.
but but I guess my point is, what is the average person supposed to do when they do want a really great dog? Like, our supply and demand is completely out of whack. I think that's the
Mhm,
point. We want people to go to either ethical breeders or responsible rescues.
mhm,
We want them to research on both sides, right? And then make a responsible choice. But
mhm.
if the responsible choice that they choose is that they would like to go the route of an ethical bred dog and they can't fucking find one, what happens? It's
So
a
maybe
problem.
this hopefully this is a little nudge. If you are thinking, I want an ethically bred dog,
Mhm.
now you know that there is a wait list
Yep.
for most of those. So start your research now, even if you feel like you're not going to be ready for that dog for five
Mhm.
years. Start your research now, and
100%.
you can always get on a wait list
Mhm.
with an ethical breeder and say, oh, I don't want this litter, or I'm not ready for the next two litters, but I want to be on your
Mhm.
wait list
Well,
because I know that's who I want to go through, but it's going to be a few years before I'm ready.
and you want to be building a relationship with that person anyway, and that takes time.
It
So
does.
when I was looking for Tiago, when I really settled into, okay, I'm looking, it was probably about a year. I got really super serious after we lost one of our dogs. And that was in January. And then in May is when I brought him home. And I'm very well connected. In that time, I had been on several lists and I had passed on several litters because different reasons it just wasn't the right fit for me. It does take time and it is a process, but during that time, I was getting to know all of these people. Now, entering into a brand new breed, I've been talking to the French Bulldog breeder for about 2 years at this point. There is like a getting to know you, and it doesn't always, sometimes it just works out and shit comes
Mhm.
together. But I would say I completely agree with Christy. If you're thinking, hey, I might want XYZ, then you should definitely be starting your research even further in advance than you think you need to. And that way, there's no harm, no foul if you aren't ready and you're on a
Mhm.
list. There really isn't. And in that time, you're losing nothing because all you're gaining is education.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it may be that maybe that breeder is not the right one for you
Mhm.
2 years down the road, but they say, "Hey, I have this other connection."
Yes. Most
And I
breeders have
think there,
referrals. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So,
I wanna
um,
say, like, a majority of our friends who have dogs from ethical breeders, they waited about a year.
okay. Yeah.
Yep. Mhm.
So definitely some planning in advance and
Mhm.
not a, I've lost my dog, I need a new dog
Yeah.
tomorrow.
So let's say you're listening to this episode and you're like, "Well, I don't wanna wait 2 years and do all this
Right.
planning and whatever and all this bullshit just to get a dog." And you don't have specific requirements in your
Mhm.
household for what you're looking for. You just want a great stable dog for your family.
Mhm.
Me, I'm going to say to those people all day long, find a responsible rescue, whether it's an all breed rescue, whether it's a rescue that focuses on purebreds, if it's
Mhm.
a rescue that starts out with puppies or whatever you're looking for, find those groups and go and get to know the dogs. And then we'll
Mhm.
listen to our responsible rescue episode because that's a great
Right.
resource. And maybe you foster a dog and
Mhm.
you decide if that's the right fit for you. So I think that I just think that there's a fit for everybody. It just depends on what your family dynamics look like. For me right
Right.
now, today, that's buying a dog from an ethical breeder. That might change tomorrow. And it was different in my past because we've
Mhm.
had tons of adopted dogs
Right. And I have a lot of requirements for a dog, which is why I would want to go to a responsible rescue who
and you
can
will
tell me,
foster.
like, great with other dogs, great with
Yeah,
people, great with, all these things, but also I don't need a sport prospect.
right.
I don't need a
A
dog that
particular
needs
breed.
to, yeah, I don't need a particular breed. Those things are not important to me. So I do have more leniency
Mhm.
and I don't want a puppy no matter
Actually, we really are the 2 different
we
scenarios.
are.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's so interesting because we
Although
really, really are.
we both have a lot of things we want from our dogs.
And we
Like
both
a lot
kinda
of
overlap.
requirements, but
Yeah.
yeah,
You see the value at this point in ethical breeding. You understand why I do what I do right now in my life.
yeah.
And I understand and have complete support for responsible rescue as well. Okay, so let's talk about some barriers that come up when people want to go to an ethical breeder, because I think we need to talk about that too. Because it's not all
Yeah,
roses. I've been around for
it's
20
all
years at this
roses.
point. No. I think that cost is
Mhm,
absolutely a barrier. I see some change in that. I see some ethical breeders who are offering payment plans. I
mhm.
see some different things happening in the industry that I love. So I do see change, but I think that cost is a barrier.
Yeah. I will also say, I think a lot of people who go to backyard breeders, it's not about cost because
Oh,
they're
that's a
paying
great
as
point.
much
Or
or
more.
more for their dogs. People who buy from pet stores as much
That's
or
true.
typically much more than they would pay from an
And
ethical
they find the
breeder.
money.
But
That's a fair
but
point.
we but we also absolutely understand that is not the case for everyone.
I will pay half the price for my French bulldog than what I've seen advertised far and wide on the internet
Mhm.
that are
Yeah.
coming from puppy mill situations, from pet stores with zero health testing, god awful breathing problems, dogs who are going to die. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm not being dramatic because we have vet friends and we know it's reality.
Yeah.
So that's a fair point. I think geography is a factor. I flew to New York to get Tiago. I will be flying to Canada to get my new puppy. So
Yeah.
geography is absolutely a factor.
I know some people feel more comfortable being in the same state as their
Yes.
breeder. Like
Yes.
Michelle had never considered going out of state
Mhm.
for a dog and felt much more comfortable that her breeder was in the state just because she had never considered. So she needed to
Yeah.
wrap her mind around that. So yeah, so geography is a thing.
I think supply and demand is a
Mhm.
huge problem, absolutely a huge problem. I
Mhm.
think how ethical breeders advertise or don't advertise is a major
Yeah.
problem. And I think that ethical breeders meeting the average pet home in the middle and offering support is a problem. And the onus of that lies on the ethical breeder, but then also on people like us to educate both sides
Yeah.
on how to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, I'm gonna disagree a little bit with you on the lack of advertisement because I think ethical breeders already have wait lists. I don't know
Oh,
that
oh, I see what you're saying.
they need to advertise more because I get what you're saying. So if you have a wait list, you're not gonna be like, here, let me advertise to the masses.
I mean,
But
how
also if
how
you're
is the
taking back every dog or you're committed to taking back every
yeah,
dog, you're not producing 1,500 dogs.
but
You
if
know,
you're
you're
but
not.
uh, but if you're doing everything right and you're educating in all of this stuff, the likelihood of a dog coming back is really small.
Yes, but it still
So
happens. It
it
could still
absolutely
happen.
does happen.
Yeah.
So Tiago's breeder has been breeding for almost 10 years.
Mhm.
And I believe she's taken back in 10 years 4 dogs, 4 adults,
Mhm.
and they've been rehomed. So it does happen. My friend who breeds pugs, I can't think of a time where she's ever done needed to do a rehome ever. But
And
the
but
advertisement, where I mean for that is
uh,
how is the average person supposed to find ethical breeders
right,
if they don't even know that they exist and all the stuff that's in front of
yeah,
them are these ads for
right,
$10,000 puppies. You know what I'm saying? That's what I
right,
mean when I'm
yeah,
talking about advertising.
yeah, they just have to have friends like us who can tell them.
Word. That is so true.
You just have to stumble across the right friends. Like, dang.
I mean, that actually kinda sucks.
Sorry, you guys gotta be friends with us.
Well, not Christy 5 years ago. She wouldn't have known.
But like, I don't get a rescue dog. Stop talking to me.
That's so funny.
I would say one experience I had that really changed the way I saw breeders. I was already on board, with Heather
You
and
were deep
responsible
in.
breeding. I was in. I was already in. And Heather asked me if I would come and photograph this puppy party where the breeder was introducing her puppies to the pool and had the buyers there
Some of them,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah, some of them that were local there as well, interacting with their future puppies and that type of thing. So I get there, and the great thing about having a camera in your hand is people forget you're there. So
Mm.
people, because I'm putting that in quotes, working. And so they just see me photographing dogs. So they're having full conversations around me, right? As if I'm not there, which is great because then I'm just being a creep and listening in on all these conversations like a fly on the wall. And I have to say, I was blown away by the breeders.
There
They
were
were
two
talking
co-breeders,
two,
just
yeah,
yeah, so 2.
co-breeders, yeah. They were talking about a situation where one of them had been sitting all night with a previous purchaser from past litter. Like,
Mhm,
it seemed like the dog was an adult at this time
mhm,
from what I could gather, and she was in the emergency vet with them all night long because the dog was mysteriously sick and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And she rushed down to sit with this family and be a part of that situation
mhm,
and
and to
make sure she
offer
lended
her
support.
mhm,
Yeah, and to offer expertise on the breed and support and just be available. I was just blown away by that because I don't think I'd ever heard of a breeder doing that.
d
And
was
I'm
that
not saying that
was that
uh,
the first time you ever saw a breeder, an actual breeder interacting? Because you had heard me talk about breeders, but
right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was the first time I had seen a breeder interacting because that's not my world. I'll be
yeah,
honest, that's not my world. Had you told me 5 years ago that I would be photographing a puppy party, I would have said, "You're wrong."
yeah,
And then the other was while I was there, they were discussing one of the puppies that had not been purchased yet.
mhm,
And the breeder had no intention of keeping a puppy from this litter.
mhm,
However, she could not find the right fit for this specific puppy. And she had decided that she was willing to keep a puppy that she had not intended to keep, had no desire to keep as her own
it
personal pet dog.
it wasn't part
You
of her
know,
timeline, yeah,
yeah, it wasn't. But she would rather do that than allow that dog to go to the wrong home. And I was flabbergasted. I was blown away that to her, it meant more to make sure that dog was in the right environment, in the right home, than it meant to keep her own personal agenda with
mhm,
her timeline and different things. It ended up that they found the right home for this
mhm,
dog who ended up going to another home with very experienced GSP owners. But I just, that whole experience and seeing how invested these co-breeders were in their puppies and how much they cared about the owners, not just
mm,
the puppies, but the owners of these puppies was just eye-opening, and I don't know that I'm definitely not doing it justice, but seeing it in person and being able to be a fly on the wall was a game changer for me
mhm,
when it comes to responsible breeding. I felt
yeah,
like I honestly walking away from that, I think I told you that day, Heather, if everyone could see what I just saw,
mhm,
there would be no debate
mhm,
that one, ethical breeders exist, and two, that it's the right thing to have ethical breeders
mhm,
exist.
yeah. That was my second puppy party, and when we say puppy party, that's like a really, really, like, really fun puppy peppy name, but it's so much more than that because it's
Mhm,
when the breeder's assessing the different puppies' temperaments, it's getting to know the buyers, it's seeing how puppies respond to different things, in this case, a pool. It's so much more. The puppies are in a new environment. It's much bigger than that, but it's like cute little buttoned up name. We call it a puppy party,
mm,
and that was my second experience with 2 different breeders and 2 different breeds, and I will say that both experiences were just as incredible and affirming for me of what I already knew, which is this is so important for dogs and for people, and
mhm,
this is what it's supposed to look like. And I
mhm,
have the utmost respect for breeders who are doing it ethically because
mhm,
they are putting their heart, their soul, their purse strings, their lives
mhm,
into their decisions. And not a single ethical breeder makes a decision lightly. And when they get one wrong, it bothers them more than you can ever even imagine. And I think that it's really tough when we use the word breeder because it puts everybody who
mhm,
throws 2 dogs together under this same umbrella. And that's a
Sure.
real problem because
Mhm.
there's a huge gaping
Difference, yeah.
difference between
A
one
canyon
end to
of
the
a difference.
other. It's unbelievable. And I think that there's a lot in the middle too. And I
Sure.
would rather see people tending towards one side, even if it's not all the way over, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really important. And you talking about the puppy party, every time you talk about it, I get chills because
Mm,
I know that you got to experience something so special and
mhm,
it made such an imprint on you as a person.
mhm.
And I think that's the day you like really truly understood that part of me. You've
Yeah,
known
yeah.
Tiago for years,
Right,
but
right.
that day
That
you
part,
really
yeah,
100% got it. And I'm thankful that you got to experience that.
yeah.
I
Even and I will say, like, even things I hadn't thought of in that breeder party or that puppy party was she specifically asked one of the breeders asked you, "Could you bring out Tater?" Because
yes.
they've never seen a dog with his shape
Yep.
or who makes those sounds.
Mhm.
And we would like the puppies to experience
Mhm.
dogs of different sizes,
Mhm.
of different temperaments, different
Mhm.
all sorts of,
Mhm.
different looks, all of
Mhm.
it. They were very intentional in that.
Yes. And I remember you saying to me, you had overheard the breeder who lives in Oklahoma now. She had traveled in for this, and you had overheard her telling one of the buyers that she would do Zoom training with them and that she could video conference, giving them tips and everything. And you were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's normal." Especially for a
yeah,
breed like a GSP where they need to work and they have more
mhm,
requirements. So
yeah.
people need a little bit more breeder support if they're not really heavy in the breed.
That was over a year ago, and
Mhm.
I'm Facebook and Instagram friends with one of the breeders,
Mm.
and so I follow her, and you can just tell she beams with
She's so
pride
proud.
every time her puppies she posts all the time, like, "This puppy just earned this,"
Mm.
"This puppy just got ribbons in this,"
Mhm.
and so proud of how her puppies are
Mhm.
doing and still connected with those purchasers.
Mhm. Yeah, and actually that was her first litter she had ever bred, and her
Mhm.
breeder of her dog was her mentor. So that's a
Yeah.
good example of how the mentorship can work within breeders.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap this all up, I feel like a really overarching theme of everything, of the responsible rescue staff, ethical breeding, having functional, safe, behaviorally sound dogs no matter where they come from. I feel like today the bar is higher than it's ever been for what dogs have to kind of deal with and roll with in our society. The bar is so high.
Mhm.
And we live in a more urban society than we ever have. In some ways, this is probably controversial. I'm going to use the word. We've institutionalized our dogs because their lives are very small in comparison how dogs grew up with us. There's good and bad to that. I know, Christy.
Not even giving her a look,
She gave
just
me
so
a look.
y'all know.
She did give me
I
a look.
didn't, that's just my face.
But with all that being said, I feel like we need their genetics to be really up there to be able to
Mhm.
handle everything that we throw at them. And I feel like while we say that everyone deserves a stable dog, no matter where it comes from, we also have to make sure that those are the dogs that we're offering. And the responsibility of that falls on the people who are in the industry.
Man, and that's tough too, in
It
that
is. It's
there
heavy.
are guess what? There are some breeds that just aren't going to do well as an apartment dog. Like, that's just
Mhm,
not the breed standard, and
mhm.
I don't think breeders should try to make
Border collie.
okay, I was gonna go with yeah, border collie's fine. Actually, I knew a border collie who lived in
Oh,
an
here we
apartment,
go.
great.
There's always outliers,
There's always
guys.
an
There's always an
exception.
outlier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking like a German short hair pointer, like,
That's a good
that's
one.
that's not an apartment dog, and, like,
Yeah.
I don't think breeders should be trying to breed them into apartment living.
Yeah.
And so I guess that goes back to the education portion of it,
Mhm.
that just because you like a breed doesn't mean it's the right fit for you.
Oh, I love GSPs, German short hair pointers.
Uh,
Literally love them to look at. There's so many things that like check a box for me. No freaking way would I own that breed. It is
Yeah,
so wrong for me. So
yeah,
wrong. Love you to
yeah,
all my GSP breeders, but no,
yeah,
it's so wrong. And so there is that educational part. And that falls back to the breeder and the buyer and the rescue, all of them.
yeah. It's messy, guys.
It's
That's
messy.
what I will say.
It
It's
is
messy.
messy. But education and talking about it
Yeah,
is the key to it all.
yeah, yeah. And there's some standards of what we started the definition very basic healthcare. If your
Mhm.
puppy doesn't come with shots,
Mhm.
you're not going to an ethical breeder. Some very like I can 100% if your dog comes unvaccinated to you, you have not gone to an ethical breeder. I will paint a broad brush with
There
that
you
one.
go.
But then there's all these other things. So hopefully we at least gave you
Things to
some
think
things to
about.
think
Mhm.
about.
Hopefully everybody's still with us. Our next episode, we are going to have an interview with a breeder that I hold in very high regard.
Mhm.
She has graciously been willing to get on a Zoom call with us and
Mhm.
be a part of our podcast.
Yeah.
She is not just an ethical breeder of purebred dogs, she is a huge proponent of rescue, and
Mhm.
she also fosters for different breeds. We are super excited to have
Yeah.
Lorelai on our next episode. Just like Christy Cole was interesting to talk to on the rescue side, but of us
Mhm.
as a supporter also of ethical breeding.
Mhm.
Lorelai is an ethical breeder who also wholly supports rescue. And so I think it's going to be really interesting for people to hear the whole picture. So I hope everybody sticks with us.
Yes, because I think no matter where you're at in your journey of ethically bred, backyard bred, rescue, whatever, wherever you're at with your journey in dogs, I think you can gain something
There's
from
value.
hopefully this episode, our rescue episode, and then the upcoming interview
Yeah.
as well.
We very much appreciate your time. We appreciate your open mindedness to sit with us through all of this. We know for some of you, as Christy says, this could potentially be a paradigm shift, and we know that's difficult. If anyone has any questions whatsoever, we ask that you reach out. I'm an open book. Everybody knows where to find me if you're following the podcast on Instagram, and you can absolutely reach out to me with questions. I also have now made a online course on my website, and we'll link that in the show notes, of how to find an ethical breeder.
Mhm.
And it's a super inexpensive course. It's very educational. It's about an hour and a half long. It goes through health testing, it goes through how to even start from start to finish. So if you have questions or you just want to dive deeper and learn more, I would encourage you all to check that out. And
And if you are wanting to reach out to us on Instagram, we are at Sometimes There's Side Eye. If you like this episode, subscribe, rate us,
share us.
share us. That's the other one on any of the platforms of your choosing.
Bye.
Bye.